So here I'm having a go at moulding some water soluble wrap straps, and I'm having to use a 3-plate system to do this, which puts a runner on the back which I can just tear off and recycle, and then that feeds through to the front plate, and because these are still warm they're quite pliable, so I can just peel them out of the mould and then have to reassemble all the plates and do it again. But it is working quite well, and although they're fairly flexible at this point, that's purely because they're quite warm. We had one here that came out a few minutes ago, that is now quite rigid. But if you wait a couple of weeks, these will rehydrate, and at that point they'll go soft and flexible again. It's an unfortunate consequence of working with this material, but it does seem to be moulding quite well. It's a shame the cycle time is a little bit on the slow side, but it's getting the job done. And to give you an idea of what a difference a little bit of water makes, that's fresh off the machine and is quite rigid. It's pliable, but this is what happens once they've had a chance to rehydrate. And in the past I've measured this out fairly accurately and found it's about 12 to 14%. If I actually put these on the scales, the fresh one is about 7.24 grams. I don't know if that's readable on camera, and the one that's rehydrated over a period of a few months, we're up to 19.3. So this has picked up over 2 grams from when it was moulded, which is well over 10%. And it is quite a nice material. These tear off quite well, and it's got a little bit of elasticity and fairly soft, and certainly for the purposes of just tying stuff up, that's perfectly adequate for what you're doing. But the main benefit, of course, is once these get properly wet and saturated, they'll actually fall apart and dissolve, at which point they can go back to nature and microbes will gobble it up. So it is mouldable. However, it's not trivially easy either compared to some of the other moulds that I do. This is a mould I use quite a lot, and this is simply the fixed half, and this is bolted on to the fixed side of the mould, and then this is the moving half, and this is exactly the same design product, a little bit shorter, and I've got 12 cavities on here and a runner down the centre, and then in order to pull the thing off I've got grab pins strategically placed on here and some more on this side, so this sort of pulls the moulding where I want it to be. And then all I've got to do is reach in and peel the thing out, and that works quite well. I've actually cycled this down to about 14-15 seconds. I normally run it a bit slower than that just for consistency, but it is possible to run this fairly quickly in some materials. This is polyurethane, and it flows very nicely, and I get pretty consistent results with that. However, polyvinyl alcohol is a slightly different beast, and it does not have the same kind of flow characteristics. So originally, when I started experimenting with these biodegradable polymers, this was a prototype that I put together. It's done quite a bit of work now. You can see it's pretty chewed up here where I have the pry points for getting a screwdriver in to crack this mould open. It's still working okay though, despite the fact it's had a bit of a rough ride. So I've got a moving half plate, and then I've got a central plate, and then on the back of that I've got various gating points which I've added as I've experimented with this, and again we can see quite a bit of chewing here where I've been sticking the screwdriver in, and then this is nominally the fixed half plate, although this all rides across. I could bolt this on if I wanted, and I may well do that in future, but I tried all sorts of different gating locations. This is just a 2-drop system towards the centre. This is another 2-drop but spaces them slightly further apart, and then this one pushes them right to the extremes. So this is just 2 feed points coming off my main hot runner tips, and this is the one that I ended up modifying to go full length, and I had to cut this in such a way that it would pick up as many of those gates on the back as possible, so I got quite a lot of feed points, but that does help fill the mould quite easily. I have tried this material in the past on just 2 of these gates, and it's doable, but it wasn't particularly consistent. So the sacrifice is that you've got to disassemble all of this. I could put the runner on the fixed half and bolt it in, and then just float the other 2, but it does slow the cycle time down, but it allows you to produce products that couldn't be moulded on a normal 2-plate open and shut system. You do end up with quite a substantial runner. This weighs in at about 7 grams, bearing in mind the whole moulding was coming in at about 17, but fortunately this can all be reground and reused, so it's not the end of the world. It's just the slower cycle time doing it this way. So it's doable. This is bordering on a stack mould. They're not very common. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen one actually being used, but they have a similar 3-plate system where you have a fixed half and a moving half and a plate in the middle which is on a mechanism to crank the thing apart, so you've got mouldings on both sides, and because the pressures are equalised on the front and back of the plate, this allows you to basically double the amount of space you've got on the mould, and you can basically run more parts on the same size machine. But they are quite expensive, and getting the moulding on one half, you can put that in the moving half obviously and eject it as normal, but when you get something stuck on the other side of that central plate, put these in the right order, obviously that's got to come off somehow, and you end up needing a robot to pick them out, or some other elaborate, some pushback ejectors or something. So it's quite a complex system. They're not cheap moulds, not widely used in industry, but there are some applications for them, and this is a kind of a homebrew version of that, where I'm basically putting the moulding on one side and the runner on the other. But it is a technique which works. I have used it a few times. It's not a go-to solution because it is a bit faffy and it does slow you down, but for materials which don't flow very well, it is a fairly reasonable workaround solution. And certainly in this case I've moulded quite a pile of these, and this is just a few of them. I'm going to need to wait a couple of weeks for them to rehydrate, but it got the job done.